Ladies, gentlemen and MBs, just your heads up that this video contains discussions of nuclear war, nuclear weapons testing, and on-screen medication use. So, you know the drill.
Cannes, France. Going to see Godzilla at the Palais of the Cannes Film Festival is like attending a satanic ritual in St. Peter's Basilica. It's a rebuke to the faith that the building represents. Cannes touchingly adheres to a belief that film can be intelligent, moving, and grand. Godzilla is a big, ugly, ungainly device to give teenagers the impression that they are seeing a movie. It was the festival's closing film, coming at the end like the horses in a parade. Perhaps for the same reason.
Huh. It has been a minute since I talked about Godzilla on this channel. In fact, the people who only found my channel in the last year or so, which is most of you, let's be honest, might not even know that I'm a Godzilla fan. I've seen all the movies, and I love talking about the good, chonky lizard boy. Godzilla is simply a fascinating subject with a rich history and deep themes to discuss. And also, he punches the other big friends real good, and that's pretty neat. Godzilla was honestly one of my favourite subjects to make videos about. But the last time I talked about Godzilla, it was because I was in the midst of one of the worst depression spirals in my life, and it caused me to reevaluate my broken connections to the media that I love. I was in a really dark place, and Godzilla became deeply tied into that for me, and I wasn't sure if I could possibly talk about one of my favourite topics ever again. But now, I'm on antidepressants, baby!
If you've got some sugar for me, sugar daddy, bring it home.
When it comes to Godzilla, there is something of a shadow that hangs over the series. The one thing that fans all seem to agree is the worst thing to ever happen to the franchise. A failure in the eyes of the world. A crime committed against the very art of cinema itself. The only reason that my wife left me. Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin's seminal classic, Godzilla. Released in the summer of 1998, this is, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the most reviled movie in the Godzilla canon. People actively hate this. Both die-hard fans and casual viewers seem to agree that it's just lousy. Despite being a financial success, making $379 million worldwide, almost 3 times its $130 million budget, critical reception was extremely negative, with noted critic Roger Ebert releasing an infamously scathing review of it, calling the movie
a cold-hearted mechanistic vision so starved for emotion or wit. The primary audience for Godzilla is children and teenagers, and the filmmakers have given them a sterile exercise when they hunger for dreams.
The film became something of a notable laughingstock, receiving multiple nominations at the Golden Raspberry Awards and the Stinkers Bad Movie Awards, which doesn't necessarily reflect on the actual quality of the movie, but does say that making fun of it was the popular way to talk about the film at the time. Now, 23 years later, it hasn't really received a critical reappraisal. It currently sits at 15% on the Bad for Film Criticism website, the lowest rating out of any of the Godzilla movies, and a quick look on Letterboxd shows that people still really dislike it.
So bad. Throw it in a trash can and burn it. Wow. I hate this. Worse than I could have possibly imagined. One of the worst movies I've ever seen, including one of the worst romance subplots in the history of cinema. Nothing about this movie made sense, and it was hard to watch to the end. He should not have come to America.
But is it really that bad? Personally, I don't think so. I actually kind of like this movie, and well, I've made this probably too long video to defend it. Now, if your first instinct here is to tell me why you think I'm wrong and why this movie is bad, well, quite simply, I don't care. It's just a movie. Find more important things to get upset about. So, since this movie is 23 years old now, and a lot of people don't like rewatching it, it's probably a good idea to do a quick recap of what happens in it, just so that we're all working with the same framework. And who better to recap this movie than someone who was actually there? Yes, that's right everyone, I have here Godzilla himself!
Hey, yo, I'm Godzilla over here.
Thank you so much for being here.
Don't sweat it. It's a pleasure.
So, if you don't mind, why don't you tell the people watching what happened in the movie?
Well, I don't really remember the movie too good.
You don't?
I don't know, it was a pretty good time. Got to work with Matthew Broderick. He was real nice. Have you seen him in Inspector Gadget? Just saw it the other day. He sure is good in it.
Well, this was a futile bit.
Yeah, you trying to justify your weird eBay impulse purchases or something?
Okay, that's enough out of the puppet. I'll recap the movie. The movie's opening credits take place over French nuclear tests in French Polynesia, where we see a nest of iguanas exposed to the radiation. The movie starts for real with a Japanese fishing vessel getting destroyed by a mysterious force. We then meet Dr. Nico Nyctotopoulos, played by Matthew Broderick, as he studies earthworms in Chernobyl, which are significantly larger than regular earthworms. He gets suddenly picked up by the US State Department. Meanwhile, a mysterious Frenchman, played by Jean Reno, interviews the only survivor of the destroyed ship. This old man, in a traumatized state, only says one word when prompted by this enormous lighter.
What did you see, old man?
Godzilla. Godzilla.
Nick has been taken to investigate a path of giant footprints through Panama and Jamaica. No one can pronounce his name.
Dr. Nico Topopoulos.
It's Topopoulos.
Dr. Nico Topopoulos.
It's Topopoulos.
Whatever.
How did Mrs. Tadopoulos handle that?
It's Topopoulos.
They follow the path and find the remainder of the ship. Inspecting it, Nick finds a skin sample. He determines that whatever wrecked the ship must be a creature mutated to massive size by radiation from nuclear testing. Soon the creature surfaces in New York City, causing havoc. This is witnessed by cameraman Victor Animal Palotti, played by Hank Azaria, and Audrey Timmons, played by Maria Patillo. An aspiring reporter currently stuck working as an assistant for anchorman Charles Kamen, played by Harry Shearer. A real piece of work.
Why don't we talk about it over dinner tonight? Your place.
Mr. Kamen, you're married.
Yes, and you're very beautiful. Have I ever told you that before?
Mr. Kamen?
Animal has a very close run in capturing footage of the creature. By the time the military and Nick arrive, the creature has somehow mysteriously disappeared. Nick concocts a plan to bring the creature out of hiding. During its initial rampage, it had been targeting fish, so they pile up a mountain of fish to lure it out of hiding.
That's a lot of fish.
The creature shows up, with Nick getting an up-close and personal look, but before too long, the military open fire, and following a chase in which the military blow up both the Flatiron and Chrysler buildings, the creature escapes. Taking a blood sample, Nick decides to run pregnancy tests. As he purchases the testing kits, he runs into Audrey, who just so happens to be his ex. The tests show that the creature reproduces asexually. Not that kind of asexual, though I understand the confusion. Audrey steals a videotape given to the military team by the French government, giving information on the monster's origins and featuring the old man saying Gojira from earlier. As Nick tries to convince the military that they need to be looking for the creature's offspring, the tape appears on TV with Kamen hogging the byline and naming the creature Godzilla.
And it's Gojira, you moron!
Because of this, Nick gets removed from the operation and sets out to leave, but he soon gets picked up by the mysterious Frenchman from earlier, who reveals himself to be Philippe Roche, member of the French Secret Service. They believe Nick about Godzilla's offspring and want to take him with them to deal with the nest. While this is going on, the military try the lot of fish plan again, but this time with even more helicopters, chasing Godzilla to the river, where a submarine fires on him, seemingly ending it. The French strike team track down the nest in Madison Square Garden, and get followed there by Audrey and Animal.
He trashed the garden. Oh, man. Now I'm pissed.
They find over 200 eggs which hatch into vicious little baby Godzillas. After some ripping off Jurassic Park,
Wrong floor.
the only ones left are Nick, Audrey, Animal, and Philippe. They broadcast video of the baby Godzillas from the garden's media center, the military see it and airstrike the garden, our heroes barely escaping. Then of course, Godzilla isn't really dead, and since his babies just got killed, he's angry, and he chases the four across Manhattan as they try to escape in a taxicab. They lead him to the Brooklyn Bridge, where he gets tangled up in the cables and shot by missiles, killing him. Everyone celebrates, Audrey quits, Philippe gets away with Animal's tape of the proceedings, a happy ending for all. But then, also a sequel sting, because one of the babies survived. Dun dun dun. Okay, so I think that we're all caught up. Let's get into it. Now, I'm not going to pretend like this movie is some kind of masterpiece. That's not the argument I'm trying to make here, because just on the face of it, this movie isn't that. It's not intelligent, it's not deep, and there's a bunch of stuff about it that just plain doesn't land. But it is pretty good. It's an enjoyable time with likeable characters and some well-executed action scenes. In short, it's a simple action blockbuster that delivers most of what you'd want out of one. It's also exceedingly dumb.
Whoa! This is where the Knicks, get showered and everything.
God.
In the previously mentioned Roger Ebert review, there was a section that particularly caught my attention.
One must carefully repress intelligent thought while watching such a film. The movie makes no sense at all, except as a careless pastiche of its betters. And yes, the Japanese Godzilla movies are, in their way, better, if only because they embrace Drek, instead of condescending to it. You have to absorb such a film, not consider it. But my brain rebelled, and insisted on applying logic where it was not welcome.
So, to esteemed and respected film critic Roger Ebert, the problem was that he was unable to watch the movie without applying logic to it. He goes on to point out the kind of stuff that everyone pulls this film upon. How come Godzilla can fit into a subway tunnel but not the Park Avenue tunnel when that's bigger? Shouldn't Nick have been told he was going to study a giant footprint before he is literally standing in it? The MetLife building should have collapsed if Godzilla walked through it like that and left a big hole in it. Also, he makes a pretty lazy dick joke.
You would think that if a 300-foot monster were male, that would be hard to miss. But never mind.
This, I think, characterizes the wrong approach to watching this movie, also just kind of movies in general. To spend all your time focusing on logical inconsistencies in films, seeing things in movies that they decide make no sense because they aren't realistic enough. But I mean, it's a Godzilla movie. I hate to break it to you, but there aren't actually giant lizards in real life. People just seem so unwilling to suspend their disbelief, to just let the movie happen and accept that some things are fine, even if they don't necessarily make sense. Godzilla fits into the subway tunnels because the scenes are better with him in the tunnels, and he doesn't fit into the Park Avenue tunnel because it makes the moment more tense when he can't. Nick isn't told what he's studying because pulling back in the big footprint is an interesting reveal. The MetLife building doesn't collapse because look at how cool it is. In short, it's a movie. If you approach the movie on its own level and stop trying to take everything so damn literally, then you will have a much better time with it. I don't agree with Roger Ebert that watching a work of art without questioning what are essentially surface-level faults is repressing intelligent thought. It's simply adjusting your expectations in line with the movie you're watching and embracing that art doesn't have to match up to a certain set of standards of reality to be good. It's just an incredibly boring way to engage with the text, honestly. The other perceived flaw that people tend to focus on when they talk about this movie is the visual effects, specifically in relation to Godzilla. It is safe to say that looking at this 23 years later, the effects have aged somewhat poorly. They're not the most convincing, and it rarely feels like Godzilla is actually part of the scene that he's supposed to be in. The same school of nitpicking that views listing things they decide don't make sense as criticism views this as an utmost failure of the movie. If the effects can't even be convincing, then why should a viewer ever get invested in the movie? It feels like a persuasive argument at times, because so much of the movie is dependent on Godzilla and the appeal of the visuals of him. As visual effects supervisor for the film, Volker Engel stated,
"In this movie, the creature is the centerpiece. We have Matthew Broderick and Jean Reno and an overall terrific cast, but the movie is still called Godzilla. It is a living, breathing animal. Every piece of destruction had to look like it was done by a real creature. So we knew from the beginning, if we should fail to establish him as a living animal, the whole movie wouldn't work. That was the single biggest challenge." It's something where the filmmakers had their work cut out for them from the start. They knew that they would honestly have a hard time bringing this to the screen with the technology available to them at the time. They put a lot of work into making things as convincing as they could. There is a considerable amount of practical effects work added in to do things like crush cars with huge rigs and crumble rubble as Godzilla steps around. The extras of the film add to it by giving their all to show utter terror on seeing a giant creature storming towards them. Then there's maybe the coolest element of the filmmaking: the miniatures. Most people only ever really bring up the CGI when they talk about this film. But just look at all the miniatures that were built, the craft and the skill that went into creating these realistic scale models of New York streets to make the destruction scenes all the more satisfying. This paired with the scale model Godzilla animatronics that they used to achieve certain scenes, including this huge one with a 1/6 scale taxi cab in its mouth. Added on to that, you have the overlooked work of Kurt Connolly, the actor inside the Godzilla suit for several parts of the film. A lot more physical effects work went into bringing this film to the screen than people tend to credit it with. People also often take issue with another effects-related aspect of the film: the rain. In this film it is raining nearly constantly. Obviously this is done for the simple practical reason of it makes it easier to make it look like Godzilla is there by obscuring him. A technique that it might be worth pointing out that we still use sometimes, but this shows that they were aware of the limitations of the technology they had and were working around it, even if it meant creating an inconvenience to those on the set getting constantly drenched.
remember Roland Emmerich, the director, saying to me about a week before we're going to shoot, like, so I decided that it's all going to be in the rain to make the creature look great. You're talking about 12 hours a day for 5 months. Every exterior, you're going to be something like, oh, how bad can it be? It was really bad.
However, despite these concerted efforts, it still isn't all that effective a lot of the time. It isn't the worst CGI from around the period, and honestly, I think there are plenty of places where it looks just fine, but it does fall short of being realistic, especially with the hindsight of how much better CGI has become since. But for me, the question is, does it matter? Why does Godzilla have to look fully convincing? If I'm already willing to accept that there is a giant lizard creature walking around New York City as the plot, then it's an easy matter to suspend my disbelief that the lizard is there, even if he doesn't always look like it. Now, an individual's mileage may vary on this, and I can see it being something of a deal breaker for a lot of people watching, but it just honestly doesn't bother me. Godzilla is a franchise built on not especially convincing special effects sequences, so this is honestly just par for the course. So yes, I do think that a lot of people's critiques of this movie do essentially come down to a way of approaching media that is uninterested in actually engaging with it, instead choosing to allow nitpicks to dominate their experience. If they were simply willing to look past these things that truly do not matter, then maybe they would have a better time watching it. On the face of it, this might sound like I'm saying that the only way to enjoy this movie is...
Don't think about it too hard, too hard. Don't think about it too hard, too hard.
But I'm not. That isn't how we do things here at David J. Bradley Incorporated. What I'm saying is that if the only stuff you focus on when you're watching a movie is these unimportant, surface-level things, then you're missing out on actually engaging meaningfully with the text. So, let's engage with Godzilla. A phrase that is often used to describe this movie is the first American Godzilla. This would seem like an apt descriptor. After all, it's the first time that Hollywood had anything to do with this property, isn't it? Except it isn't. Allow me to explain. America actually has a more complicated relationship with Godzilla than you might be aware of if you are just a casual observer. If there's one kind of observer I'm not, it's casual. The 1998 film is just one part of a long history that dates all the way back to the very beginning, with the true first American Godzilla, Godzilla King of the Monsters.
What?
She's a gonorrhea.
Huh? Ghidorah.
No, that's Godzilla King of the Monsters, the 2019 movie. I want Godzilla King of the Monsters, the 1956 recut of the original 1954 Gojira.
It's horrible, Carl. A creature made of seaweed.
No, we're not there yet.
Neither man nor his machines are able to stop this creature.
There we go. So, throughout the 1950s, America was seeing a wave of cheap schlock monster movies, the works of people like the notorious Ed Wood. Hundreds of these kinds of films were being cranked out every year. At the same time, Toho Studios were trying to launch some of their films internationally, including one of their biggest ever hits, Gojira. At the time, it was pretty rare for a Japanese film to make it over to America, and if it did, then it was only likely to be shown in art house cinemas. And they were trying to see what success they could have by launching a subsidiary in Los Angeles called Toho International. In 1956, they met with a producer called Edmund Goldman, and after some negotiation, he purchased the theatrical and TV rights to Godzilla for $25,000.
It was a very low figure, even at the time. This was Toho's first venture in the US, and they were anxious to get into the American market. They had shown me some advertising materials, and I thought it looked interesting, so I asked them to screen it for me. I made them an offer, and they accepted it rather quickly. I didn't know at the time that Raymond Burr was going to be in it, or that it would be dubbed into English. I just thought it was something we could put subtitles on. It turned out to be a bonanza.
However, Goldman was perhaps not the right producer for the job. He primarily worked in distributing American films internationally, and actually had very little knowledge of how to sell an international film in the US. So he turned to Harry Ribnick and Richard Kay of Jewel Pictures.
They saw all the possibilities. It was their idea to dub it, and to get the services of Raymond Burr.
Soon, under the direction of Terry O'Morse, a number of new sequences starring American actor Raymond Burr, who would later become famous for playing the title role in the long-running series Perry Mason, were shot, and the film was recut to incorporate these scenes and dub in English dialogue over the rest. And Godzilla, King of the Monsters, was born. The result is a flawed work, to say the least. When you get Eiji Tsuburaya's effect sequences, they are still phenomenal and land with as much punch as in the Japanese original. Ishiro Honda's direction in the human portion still works very strongly when the dub doesn't mess it up.
One answer could be that some rare phenomenon of nature allowed this breed of the Jurassic age to reproduce itself. it is my belief that Godzilla was resurrected due to the repeated experiments of H-bombs.
Was that the best take you got? He didn't even pronounce the titular monster correctly. But the new scenes are just so flat, and it never once feels like Raymond Burr is actually present with the rest of the cast. He's always just off to one side, just over there, which is a major failure in the film because he is supposed to be the new focus. The goal of Godzilla King of the Monsters is to target it to an American audience, so the film is significantly cut down to incorporate the around 20 minutes of new scenes added, but even then, it is a whole 18 minutes shorter than the film it is a re-edit of. So, what's missing? Give you one guess. Gojira is a staunchly anti-nuclear film. It is a deeply poignant reflection on the scars left by America's attacks on the country, and the continued testing by several countries in areas like Bikini Atoll, which earlier in 1954 had contaminated the Japanese fishing vessel the Daigo Fukuri Umaru with nuclear fallout, and has left the area more radioactive than Chernobyl to this day. As you might imagine, American filmmakers weren't exactly keen to spread the narratives of the atrocities they had perpetrated and were still perpetrating, having their own soldiers walking directly into the path of nuclear explosions just to find out what would happen. This footage is 100% real, and I would recommend Kyle Cochran's video on the Atomic Cafe for more information. So this film reduces all nuclear commentary to a single fleeting mention.
Radioactivity of the creature's footprint shows the existence of strontium-90, a product of the H-bomb. Godzilla was resurrected due to the repeated experiments of H-bombs.
And reduces the immediate potency of the tragedy in favour of having Raymond Burr just watching. Under the hands of Americans, the film is turned from a tragic musing on a national trauma to just another monster movie. And that is what characterises how Americans view Godzilla, devoid of his original meaning. Just a big, cool lizard, and King of the Monsters was the only version of this film that America knew, being a pretty major success, grossing $2 million, which, for the limited distribution it had and how incredibly cheaply they bought it from Toho, was absolutely huge. The film would become a staple of TV reruns, making people incredibly familiar with this inferior product with no knowledge of what they were missing out on. The original Japanese version wouldn't become available in the US until 2004, with one minor exception that I'll get to in a bit. This was all they had access to. For America, this was Godzilla. The next three films in the franchise would receive similar treatment, though to lesser degrees. 1955's Godzilla Raids Again would lose about 4 minutes of total runtime, and add in some stock footage from the first movie, to be released in the US in 1959 as Gigantus the Fire Monster. A name change seemingly made because the producers behind the recut didn't think anyone would want to see a sequel to Godzilla, and if they called it this then they could trick audiences into thinking it was a whole new monster? It didn't work. The film was a bit of a flop. 1963's King Kong vs. Godzilla would receive an intensive re-edit at the hands of producer John Beck. This was largely because the original cut of the film had a lot of very specific satire of Japanese TV media at the time that it was feared wouldn't translate. So a bunch of the film's most interesting aspects got removed and these disconnected scenes of an American news anchor are added in, and the result is a patchy mess.
Ah, too bad. We forgot to bring candy. You better not smoke it around home.
Bloody hell. Once again, this would be the only version of the film that would be available in English-speaking countries for decades. In fact, the Japanese version only became available in the UK and the US in 2019 with the Criterion Blu-ray set, where it is relegated to supplementary features on the bonus disc. 1964's Mothra vs. Godzilla had very limited changes, a couple of small cuts, one additional superfluous scene of the US military trying to shoot Godzilla with a missile, and a new title of Godzilla vs. the Thing. What's most significant about this film is that the international rights were acquired by producer Henry G. Saperstein, who soon became one of the most important figures in America's history with Godzilla. Saperstein was familiar with the Godzilla films up to this point, and he had something of a different idea for how Godzilla ought to be portrayed. Up till now, Godzilla in Japan had always been the malevolent force in his movies and holding on to the powerful allegory of the original, but Saperstein thought he should be the hero.
I sat in the audience, and I saw that although they were depicting him as a villain, the audience saw Godzilla as a hero and were cheering for him. That's when I went to Tokyo to talk to Toho about playing him as the hero he was, rather than cloaking it in a metaphorical message. I told them that if they did that, Godzilla would become a worldwide phenomenon. Godzilla is the guy in the white hat who comes forth reluctantly to save the day when somebody's messing things up. It's a classic morality play.
Saperstein would enter into a multi-picture deal with Toho, co-financing 3 monster pictures. Frankenstein Conquers the World, War of the Gargantuas, and the one that matters to us here, 1965's Invasion of Astro Monster. To increase the international appeal of the film, Saperstein would add an American actor to the mix. The episode slightly washed up Nick Adams. The way it worked is that Adams performed his lines in English while the other actors performed in Japanese. So in the Japanese release, Nick Adams is dubbed into Japanese, and in the US release, all of the Japanese actors are dubbed into English, meaning there is no one true dub of the film. In spite of this language barrier on the set, the actors actually have a surprising amount of chemistry together, and it's really charming to watch.
You don't know what you're saying.
Oh, no, I just stated a general fact.
That won't buy groceries.
Oh, true, but it's necessary in everyday life.
You're fighting me. You always agree with the girls.
Also, these two are definitely boyfriends. Beyond the interesting bilingual production, this film is notable for fully making Godzilla into a hero with no reservations. No longer was he the force of nature threat and powerful nuclear allegory. Instead, he was Earth's defender and does a Shie dance.
A happy moment.
At this point, Godzilla would only be known as this heroic figure. What Saperstein wanted came to pass. Through the following years of dubs leading up to 1974's The Terror of Mechagodzilla, Godzilla would exist almost solely without his allegorical roots, and would just be the meaningless monster that America had always wanted him to be. After 1974, Toho Studios decided to stop producing Godzilla films as they were no longer successful, but America still saw some potential in the property as they had transformed it. From 1977 to 1979, Marvel produced a comic book series where Godzilla interacts with the Avengers, which is pretty wild, but not hugely significant, plus I haven't had time to read it. But in 1978, legendary animation studio Hanna-Barbera created a Godzilla animated series that aired on NBC for 2 seasons. The show is a fairly perfect distillation of how far Godzilla got taken from where he began. Here, the crew of the ship the Calico would travel the world investigating scientific anomalies, which invariably turned out to be some sort of giant monster. Upon facing this foe, they would use their Godzilla summoning signal to call the King of the Monsters up to do battle. So Godzilla is not only a purely heroic figure, he also has a group of human friends that he works with. I feel like there's something else about the show I'm forgetting to mention too. Oh yeah! Godzuki is Godzilla's cousin, a little himbo dragon with tiny wings who gets into all sorts of scrapes, an element designed exclusively to add extra appeal to the kids watching. The show was chiefly created with kids in mind, and as such, the darker edges of Godzilla were filed off even further. As Joseph Barbera commented,
"The problem with the show was simply this. When they start telling you in standards and practices, don't shoot any flame at anybody. Don't step on any buildings or cars. Then pretty soon, they've taken away all the stuff he represents. That became the problem. To maintain a feeling of Godzilla and at the same time cut down everything that he did, we managed to get a fair show out of it. It was okay. Godzuki kinda got the kids going."
But honestly, in spite of this kidifying of the idea and the limitations they were working with, this show actually slaps. I really enjoy it. It's incredibly formulaic and full of really basic one-note characters, but each episode has really good rising action with satisfying payoffs. It's a well put together action show and I recommend it. Godzilla has so much personality in this show with some great facial expressions and roars performed by Ted Cassidy, who was Lurch in the Addams Family, and very clearly just sounds like a guy roaring into a microphone. Then there's Godzuki, performed by Scooby-Doo himself, Don Messick. He's consistently funny and adorable in his clumsy antics, but just as often helpful and important to the plots of the episode. He is an absolute delight. I will hear no Godzuki slander on this channel. I love this good boy and I will defend him with my life.
Boy, Godzuki, you're doing great!
The next first American Godzilla would be Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Security decides to use depth bomb on Godzilla.
Oh, that's fine.
No, that's Godzilla King of the Monsters, the 1956 recut of the original 1954 Gojira.
That means it's coming for food, a fight, or something more intimate.
No, that's Godzilla King of the Monsters, the 2019 movie. I Want Godzilla King of the Monsters in 3D, the failed 1983 project by Steve Miner. Godzilla would have been attacking San Francisco and would be atomic because of residual energy from the Big Bang, I guess? There's not too much to say about this one here. It never got past the storyboard stage and was ultimately deemed too expensive. But as the interest in the project was at its peak, the Japanese cut of the original received its first airings in the US in limited theatrical runs in New York and Chicago. So even this movie that never happened had an effect on some of the public's perception of the series. And we're still not up to the 1998 movie yet, because there's one more American project with Godzilla that came first. In the years following the terror of Mechagodzilla, there have been a few attempts by Toho to restart the series on their end, but none of them came to fruition until 1984, when they made a film simply titled Gojira. You thought there were a lot of films called King of the Monsters? Well, there's even more just called Godzilla. This was a dark, moody, and politically driven film that sought to take Godzilla back to his origins by ignoring all previous sequels. It was a special effects spectacular and the highest budget effects movie in Japan to that date, and it did not perform well domestically. For its inflated budget, it was a downright flop. So, when it came to selling it to the US, it was back to the old tricks of recutting the movie. It was released as The Return of Godzilla in 1985, with scenes drastically rearranged and all new sections shot where they brought back the absolute unit Raymond Burr to reprise his role from the original, which is pretty cool. But his scenes feel somehow even more disconnected than they did in 1956, and the resulting edit turns what is one of the most interesting and somber Godzilla films into a bit of a dull, incoherent mess, and I could really just go for a refreshing beverage right about now. From here, America's relationship to Godzilla was largely reduced to the home video market. The movies were generally considered laughable, cheap fare with some spectacularly silly dubs.
But then, dinosaurs and birds are genetically similar.
Oh my god!
They were B-movies, a joke, with little commercial success outside of the die-hard fans. Over the course of just over 40 years, Godzilla had become a household name, but a laughingstock. And all of that is the context under which Hollywood would create a new Godzilla movie in 1998. Godzilla in America was, in every iteration, intentionally divorced from its meaning. The franchise was separated from the allegory that made it, leaving an often tonally confused, hollow shell that they wanted to serve as nothing more than a mindless B-movie entertainment, where even the more serious productions were reduced to run-of-the-mill monster features. But could an American Godzilla be more than that? Could it actually say something? So the audio for the on-camera stuff in this section just came out really bad, so I'm just going to dub over this bit, like an old Godzilla movie. Godzilla in the original films is a prehistoric creature awoken from slumber by the testing of nuclear weaponry in the Pacific Ocean. But Godzilla 1998 takes a slightly different approach to the origins of the creature. Here, Godzilla is a regular animal, probably an iguana, mutated to his enormous size by radiation. The cause of the carnage lies in the same place as the original, but with a different effect to it. Rather than a vengeful force of the Earth striking back at us for our actions attacking it, it's a monster of our own making. Something where our lack of thought of the consequences created a whole worse problem. So in its own unique way, this movie is staying true to what the franchise was always supposed to be about. The continued proliferation of the nuclear arms race and the inevitable consequences that this has had and will continue to have unless we stop it. The world cannot take what we are doing to it. And in the fantasy of a Godzilla film, the world can strike back at us for our actions directly.
The first one is very impressive because it has a good message. Pretty much like an ecological message. If we keep doing nuclear testing, that brings bad consequences. Nature strikes back. And Godzilla is a symbol of that. And ours was like a reinterpretation of that movie in modern terms. But that's why we had the opening sequence of the atomic explosions and the lizards. Godzilla stands for nature's revenge, what we have done to this Earth.
The opening sequence is a nuclear test being performed in French Polynesia by the French government. In the 30 years between 1966 and 1996, the French government carried out extensive nuclear testing on the uninhabited atolls Mororora and Fangataufa. The official number of tests carried out is still largely unknown, though estimated at somewhere between 175 and 181. Until 1974, these were atmospheric tests being performed in the open air. According to Greenpeace, the very first of these tests would spread contamination as far as New Zealand and Peru, just under 3,000 miles and just over 4,000 miles respectively. The 41st test, which took place on the 17th of July 1974, took a different trajectory than expected and subjected Tahiti and several surrounding atolls to significant amounts of ionizing radiation, with approximately 110,000 people exposed to it. This is information that was concealed by the French government until independent research was performed by French news website Disclose, researchers from Princeton University, and British firm Interpret over the past 2 years. Later in 1974, after a lot of pressure from protesters, the French government would move their test to underground shafts. This would prevent the possibility of further incidents from atmospheric dispersion, but came with a whole new issue. The nuclear bombs that they let off in this period were causing cracks in the atolls. There was significant fear that the leftover nuclear material from these detonations would eventually come into contact with the ocean and spread the contamination. So disastrous were these cracks that in one of the tests they carried out, the bomb got stuck halfway down the shaft and caused an entire chunk of an outer slope of the atoll to just break off and fall into the ocean, leading to a tsunami. The tests only really stopped in 1996 because the UN put together the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which stopped almost all nuclear testing across the world. Yeah, except not entirely, because it was never actually entered into force, because 8 countries never ratified it. So make no mistake, France carried out dozens of nuclear tests over a period of 3 decades, covered up the worst of the effects, and would probably still be doing it today if it weren't for the UN doing something about it. By presenting us with this as the opening to our Godzilla movie, and having Nick lay out that Godzilla was mutated by nuclear testing, the movie draws a very clear line to say that the French nuclear tests are responsible for Godzilla, a more direct line of political criticism than anything America had previously attempted in their versions of Godzilla. In fact, even the original Japanese films did not tend to be this explicit. It is a pretty easy mistake to make to look at the politics of the original film, the anti-nuclear message, and think it's only about America's use of the weapons. It's certainly something I've thought and said before. But while the devastating effects of America's attack on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Bikini Atoll incident are the most obvious and direct line one can draw, they never actually mention any country by name. America were not the only ones carrying out those tests, and it isn't clear whose nuclear tests awoke the creature. Gojira stands in opposition to all uses of nuclear weaponry, but Godzilla 1998 points in a very specific direction. The critique continues through the inclusion of the character of Philippe, a member of the French Secret Service who's working desperately to try and cover up France's involvement in the creation of Godzilla. He hides evidence, bugs the US military briefings, builds up a huge armory of weapons to take out the Godzilla babies.
How did you get all this stuff into the country?
This is America. You can't buy anything.
And he just can't get a good cup of coffee.
No croissant? Non, monsieur.
They're shown to be efficient, effective, and always looking on with a calculated air, as if to say they know more than they are willing to tell, and will not hesitate to use their knowledge to hide the truth, which stands in direct contrast to the film's depiction of the US military. We spend a significant amount of the film's runtime with the military unit that picks up Nick and tries to take down Godzilla. They are one of our primary viewpoints for the events of the film. We have Nick, who is interested in learning about Godzilla, and the military, who are aiming to wipe him out. It's a film where the main character is an environmentalist. He sees the monster as something amazing that ought to be studied. When he has his close encounter with Godzilla at the pile of fish, he is the only one telling the military to stand down. He sees this creature as what it is, a one-of-a-kind living organism that only happened because of cruel and evil actions taken by mankind. But of course, no one listens to the scientist, and large portions of the movie are spent trying to kill Godzilla and his offspring. When faced with the problem that mankind created, their only recourse is to destroy what they don't understand. But they're really bad at it. The military are hopelessly incompetent in most of their attempts to take out Godzilla in this film. During their first attempt, after
That's a lot of fish.
they open fire on him, and he just ducks. They miss and blow up the Flatiron building. Oopsie doodles. Then in their chase, they don't realise that their heat-seeking missiles won't work on the cold-blooded reptile, and well...
That is a negative impact. I repeat, that is a negative impact.
Negative impact, sir.
Negative impact? That's the goddamn Chrysler building we're talking about here.
Not to mention how Godzilla just kinda dopes them and sneaks around the back of them. It's honestly great. The military actually cause far more damage than Godzilla in this movie. If they weren't so trigger-happy and eager to kill without a thought, then the Chrysler building would still be standing. This portrayal of an incompetent military force is aided significantly by the authority figures at the head of it. We have Colonel Hicks, played by Kevin Dunn, and Mayor Ebert, played by Michael Lerner, which is part of a whole weird parody of Siskel and Ebert that the movie is doing. It's silly, adds nothing, and doesn't really have any real payoff, but Michael Lerner is pretty fun in the role, so whatever.
Back off, Jane.
They are arrogant, overly confident, and will not listen to the experts they hired. Perhaps the most direct depiction of this is everyone's inability to pronounce Nick's very easy surname.
It's Sotopoulos. It's Sotopoulos. It's Sotopoulos.
Presented with even a slightly foreign-sounding name, these Americans are just completely incapable of pronouncing it. So when Nick says that he thinks Godzilla has laid eggs, they don't listen to him, and he gets kicked off the project after their private footage is leaked on the news, with Cayman also unable to pronounce an incredibly easy foreign word.
What is this Godzilla? Where did he come from? Why is he here?
And it's
Find out in this
Gojira, you
special
moron!
Gee, I wonder if there's some sort of direct comparison to be made between the arrogant, insecure white guy authority figure who sexually harasses his employees and the military leaders. The culmination of the movie comes when they finally manage to actually kill Godzilla after trapping him in the Brooklyn Bridge where he's defenseless. They can only get him when he's a sitting duck. The moment is given a brief piece of pathos as we hear Godzilla's heart slowly stop. But then, seconds later, this incredible creature, this whole new species that had no choice in its existence, is brutally shot down in cold blood, and everyone happily cheers and celebrates. If handled just a little better than it was, this could have been an actually powerful statement. But sadly, Nick, Audrey, Philippe, Animal, everyone outside of the military influence are celebrating too. If someone had some sympathy, some emotion over what happened other than joy, then there could have been a payoff to what the rest of the film built up. But for its faults in delivery on this, I still find it admirable that the film made as much of a statement as it did. That it actually said something critical about France's role in nuclear testing and shady cover-ups. That it was actually willing to depict the US military as incompetent and unwilling to actually think through their problems for most of the runtime. It's honestly more than I can say about US Godzillas that would follow. In the immediate wake of the 1998 film came Godzilla the series, an animated sequel series to the movie where the surviving Godzilla baby fights various monsters with a team comprised of a few characters from the movie, acting nothing like their film counterparts.
We need you! You really gonna let those space monkeys beat you? You're the only one who could stop them from taking over your planet!
This is meant to be Matthew Broderick? Seriously? And a couple of new characters, including Randy, who is the worst, and I hate him.
Oh, what do you mean? Turkey jerky is pure nutrition.
I had never seen the show before watching it for this video, and I always heard that it was good and that a lot of people prefer it to the movie, and I really don't see it. The show is overly serious and cynical with really obnoxious characters and dialogue that is the particular kind of late 90s stilted everyone is trying to be clever style that just makes it fairly interminable to sit through.
You're insane. I happen to like that in a man.
Is it my imagination, or is this the beginning of a beautiful friendship?
It's your imagination.
And I personally find the art style kind of ugly. The show improves as it goes on, and there's definitely some merit to it, but overall, I'm not a fan. It honestly has something of a similar approach to the earlier animated series. Godzilla as an ally to a team of humans. The government-approved organisation HEAT, the Humanitarian Ecological Analysis Team. They travel the world and stop all manner of giant creatures, either killing them or imprisoning them in the military facility Monster Island. So here, Godzilla, though still often unpredictable and hard to control, essentially works for the US military. Private Godzilla reporting for duty, sir, because he's American. So I did an American accent. Despite some initial hostility between them in the opening episodes, Heat are soon liaising with the returning Colonel Hicks, who is actually still played by Kevin Dunn, which is neat, to take care of monsters for them. We go straight from the movie portraying the military in this less than flattering light as uncaring, incompetent bullies, to the show where they're pretty cool actually, and you should want what they want and not think about it. In spite of the similarities in premise and structure to the Hanna-Barbera series, there was never any implication in that one of direct military involvement, whereas here they're all over the place, regularly part of the action, important supporting players in huge swathes of the series, normalizing them. This show is ostensibly aimed at kids, and the message that it's passing on to them is that it's fine for US government agencies and military to act with impunity across the globe, intervening in any incidents that they see fit. After the 1998 film was a critical failure, planned sequel films were dropped, and after the end of Toho's Millennium series, Godzilla would go dormant as a franchise, with no new films until 2014, when Legendary Studios and Warner Brothers would launch the Monsterverse, with the fourth movie just titled Godzilla. If there is any guiding philosophy to the 2014 Godzilla. It is simply, don't be the 1998 film. So Godzilla is far closer to his original style, a powerful force of nature with thighs for days, and he comes up against other giant creatures. Of course, this is a staple part of Godzilla. Kaiju battles is a lot of what the series is about, but I think it actually does an interesting thing in this film. It makes it so we don't have to question Godzilla too much. The 98 film is concerned with Godzilla's presence, if his being there is ultimately harmful, and what his creation says about the actions that humanity has taken. But in the 2014 film, he's just a big cool monster there to fight the Mutos, set the worlds to right and leave. Yes, there are consequences to his appearance. His entrance in Hawaii causes a tsunami, and he wrecks the Golden Gate Bridge on accident, but ultimately, his being there is solely a good thing. He poses no threat to humanity. He is the hero that Henry G. Saperstein always wanted him to be. That resolves the film of having to spend too much time on the nuclear ties of Godzilla's origins. That's not to imply the film has nothing to say on nuclear issues. They do actually bring up America's history of nuclear testing in the Pacific, but they put a certain spin on it.
All those nuclear bomb tests in the 50s. Not tests.
They were trying to kill it.
So you see, the nuclear tests weren't just a pointless escalation of the most deadly arms race the planet has known that saw thousands forcibly removed from their homes and irradiated islands so badly that they have never recovered. The military were actually acting purposefully and trying to save us from something they perceived as a threat. This is fine! Then the main threat of the movie, the Mutos, feed on nuclear energy, and are gathering nuclear weapons to feed their offspring. Gee, I wonder where they might have lifted that element from. The military plan to use a nuclear weapon to take out the Mutos, one significantly more powerful than the ones used against Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Nothing can withstand that blast. Makes the bomb we tried to kill it with in 54 look like a firecracker.
But they capture it and take it to San Francisco, so part of the climax of the movie is the main character Ford trying to stop the bomb before it's too late. But the issue for the soldiers here is never that they were using a nuke, it's that the nuke ended up in a populated area. You see, using a nuclear weapon is still just fine, so long as it isn't Americans who are getting hurt. Then the portrayal of the military is far more flattering than in the 98 film. Where there the military are pompous and incompetent, here they are on top of things, calm under pressure and, well, just a little bit cool. One of the film's standout sequences is the squadron halo jumping into San Francisco in the build-up to the climax. This serves the filmmaking purpose of showing us the scale of the creature against the humans, but it also has the intent of being really cool. Look how cool this is. Look how brave those guys are. And they get to do this amazing stuff. And should I join the army? I feel like I should join the army. I think I'd fit in very well. The US military appears in a significant number of Hollywood blockbusters, which makes sense. You're battling against huge otherworldly powers, you need a force that can stand a chance against them. The military is an easy thing to use for that. But when Hollywood uses the military and wants military equipment and accuracy, they make deals with the Department of Defense. In exchange for equipment and fact-checking, the DoD regularly has input on scripts. They have been known to veto elements of scripts and make additions. Their main concern here is making the military look good. Through the significant influence that the actual military has over their own portrayals in media, they have essentially turned Hollywood movies into a huge propaganda machine. Check out Lady Night the Brave's new video about Stargate to unpack more of that. When you see them, they're almost always hyper-competent, totally badass, and most importantly, relatable. They're cool and fun and always doing the right thing. It extends as far as Disney and Marvel Studios doing literal adverts for the US Air Force with the film Captain Marvel. The Halo jump, and all other instances of the military in this film, are just adverts, hidden as cool action scenes. This carries on to varying degrees through the rest of the MonsterVerse films. Obviously, Kong Skull Island is focused on a military unit, but that's not Godzilla, so we don't have time. We have to move straight on to Godzilla King of the Monsters. No, that's Godzilla King of the Monsters 1956 recut of the original 1954 Gojira. I want Godzilla King of the Monsters, the 2019 movie. Once again, the film is full of military characters. They take the lead on the action, especially in sequences like Rodan's emergence and the ensuing evacuation. You're expected to see them being heroic, and using all their interesting kit, and see them as aspirational figures that you could be like if you just went and enlisted right after the movie. It's a pervasive and insidious messaging that they don't want you to notice is happening as it slowly works on you. Also, this movie has its only Japanese character, whose father died in Hiroshima, sacrificed himself by using a nuclear bomb to empower the American heroes to save the day, and I hate it. Also, it says that the Hollow Earth conspiracy theory is real, and bases its entire concept with the kaiju on long disproved science about alpha males. It's just the worst. Then finally, we get to Godzilla vs. Kong, which has significantly less military in it, filling the film with far more sci-fi elements than military tech. They use a spaceship to defibrillate King Kong, and it rules. Honestly, beyond some mild critiques of capitalism in a this one capitalist is bad, not the system that produced him kind of way, the film seems kind of terrified of saying anything. Don't question anything about the world or how we got where we are, just watch the big monkey do a punch. Also, the Hollow Earth is so real that they go visit it. A character so obsessed with conspiracy theories that he won't drink tap water and showers with bleach is proved to be right about the main conspiracy of the film, and by extension, all his others. And there's still more of the stupid alpha male stuff. But uh-oh, Mechagodzilla's a Sigma, the rarest type. So, in the wake of Godzilla 1998, a film that, though flawed in its attempts, is honestly willing to take a stance against nuclear weapons and testing, and portray militaries and governments as corrupt and not fit for purpose, we get a series of films that says, nuclear bombs are good, actually, and the military are your cool friends. Maybe you should stop in at that office on the way home and pick up some brochures? I find it disappointing that I have rarely seen these elements of any of the American Godzillas discussed, because people are so focused on the superficial details. Speaking of which, how about one last superficial detail to wrap things up? There is one thing I have conspicuously neglected to mention about this movie so far. The thing that upsets Godzilla fans more than maybe anything else about this movie. Godzilla himself. Fans of the series notoriously do not like this Godzilla, because it doesn't match up to what they think Godzilla should be. In fact, me even calling him Godzilla is something of a contentious point. As far as they are concerned, this is not Godzilla. The most obvious difference is the design, a radical departure from what had come before, which we can see from the most accurate renderings possible. These action figures. Godzilla typically is a big lad. He has hips for days, an admirable dad bod, and he gives off an intimidating presence through his sheer size. This is a force of nature that cannot be reckoned with. He'll just destroy everything in his path with no mercy. Godzilla in this movie, though, this boy is slim thick. With his skinny legs and arms and his big jutting out chin, this design by Patrick Tatopoulos, why does that surname sound familiar? Gives off a very different impression. He's less immediately powerful, there's more emphasis on speed. It is the least Godzilla-like Godzilla that there has ever been. God, this is tough on my knees, how does my dad do this? This can seem especially odd when people see a potential design from the early development stages of the film, a few years before Emmerich and Devlin joined the project. Created by effects legend Stan Winston, he looks like, well, Godzilla, but they use this inferior design. Then there's the way he acts, which is also not especially like Godzilla, even though the way Godzilla acts has changed significantly multiple times over the past 67 years, but never quite like this. Working close to the original idea, Godzilla is meant to be powerful and violent, storming through the city and its defences with seemingly malicious intent, smashing up the buildings like they're an inconvenience in his way. Godzilla in this movie is much more interested in hiding away, only coming out to get the fish to feed its brood. He rarely wrecks much of the city and generally runs around in between the buildings rather than going through them. The only time he even shows any aggression is after his babies have all been killed, which is justifiable, I think. He doesn't even have his trademark atomic breath. The action figure is supposed to have one it can fire out of its mouth, but I guess the eBay seller lost it. He's got one though. There's also how he handles attacks from the military. Godzilla usually does not suffer any adverse effects from a head-on military attack. Bullets do nothing, he doesn't even feel missiles, and he destroys tanks and planes with impunity. But here, at the first sign of an attack, he ducks and runs. It cracks me up every time. But the helicopters are enough of a threat that he has to run and can only take them out with sneak attacks. He's taken temporarily out of commission by a torpedo, and in the end he's killed by regular missiles. Far weaker than Godzilla ought to be. The fan response to this was that it was an act of betrayal. They ruined Godzilla with all these choices. Fans outright rejected this Godzilla, calling him names like Fraudzilla and Crapzilla, before largely settling on a phrase coined by film critic Richard Pusateri in G-Fan magazine, Godzilla in name only, or Gino for short. He was so unlike what they thought Godzilla should be that the only thing he had in common was the name. This reception was not limited to just the fans either. Toho Studios had their own response to this Godzilla. First, in the best titled movie of all time, Godzilla, Mothra and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All Out Attack, there's this exchange. Then in 2003, once TriStar Pictures' rights to Godzilla reverted to Toho, they re-trademarked the character as a new creature called Zilla. Do you get it? Because it's like Godzilla but without the god part? See, it's clever! Zilla would later briefly appear in the 50th anniversary film and my least favourite Godzilla movie, Godzilla Final Wars. He fights against Godzilla in Sydney and gets promptly destroyed in mere seconds, while Sum 41 plays for some reason. 2004 was a weird time for movies, okay? On first glance, this is kind of funny. Like, they weren't happy with how the movie turned out, so they took a couple of digs at it. But honestly, in hindsight, I just find this kind of petty. Especially considering that Toho signed off on this design before the movie was made. Not to mention that Toho's actions here would play no small part in enabling the entitled attitude that fans would have when talking about the films that came after. Because clearly, if Toho Studios agree with them, then that means they were right to dismiss anything that doesn't meet their specific standards. All of this raises a question to me though. Is this a bad thing? Does it actually make the movie worse that Godzilla isn't like how Godzilla had previously been interpreted? I would say no. Actually, it's a big part of what makes the movie interesting. You see, Roland Emmerich was not approaching this movie as a fan of Godzilla. In fact, he seems to have had a pretty low opinion of the franchise.
I was never a big Godzilla fan. They were just the weekend matinees you saw as a kid, like Hercules films and the really bad Italian westerns. You'd go with all your friends and just laugh.
And Dean Devlin would say this about getting Emmerich on board despite his disinterest in the series.
I think part of the biggest problem was that I pushed Roland into doing the movie because I was a huge Godzilla fan. I grew up with Godzilla and it wasn't something that Roland had grown up with. He didn't have a giant passion about Godzilla. He was able to find a story with me that he could get passionate about, and he was passionate about the movie we made, but this was his take on it as opposed to honouring the Godzilla legacy in a way that would make the people who loved Godzilla happy.
So he and Dean Devlin approached the film from a different point of view, one that had no concern with doing Godzilla the way fans wanted. They traded Godzilla's near-mythic, all-powerful status for an animal that was just trying to survive and feed its family. He's only a threat to the people of New York because of his size, not out of any desire for vengeance. It's man's hubris in the form of the French nuclear testing that has created this creature, and now, when the consequences of their action shows up, their immediate instinct is to kill what they can't understand. Godzilla in this film is an innocent victim, just trying to live. It's a senseless tragedy, packaged as a mindless blockbuster.
Roland and I made an intellectual idea that was interesting, but not compelling filmmaking. We said, in real life, a lizard is neither evil nor good, it's just a lizard. So what if one got to that size and in its effort to survive, it threatened us but wasn't mad at us? It was just simply doing what it did and it causes this problem for us. Well, that's interesting, but that's not Godzilla. If you go to the very first movie, Gojira, it was an evil monster. Movies after that, it was a hero. We didn't choose either.
Once again, I won't pretend that this is perfectly executed. It is a flawed version of this interesting idea. In fact, even Dean Devlin seems to agree that it doesn't fully work out. But I think, as an idea, it is one worth taking seriously. That does make for a better viewing experience if you do view the film that way. To go into it not looking for a Godzilla movie as you know it, but as a reimagining of what the concept can even mean. Something that stands wholly unique to both its Japanese and American counterparts. Honestly, the best way to view this movie is as Godzilla in name only. If you view this creature as something wholly new and separate to Godzilla, even if he does share a name with him, then it feels totally different to see him being so doggedly pursued while he just wants to feed his kids and meeting this ignoble end that is immediately celebrated by everyone as a happy occasion. It honestly has more in common with a King Kong movie than a Godzilla one in that aspect. It makes it stand as a really unique entry to the franchise, and I just think it's a shame that so many people overlook this because they thought it wasn't Godzilla enough. 1998's Godzilla is a satisfying monster movie if you look at it through the right lens. If we look beyond people's tendency to only nitpick unimportant details and actually suspend our disbelief enough to engage with the text, then it actually has some stuff to say. How successfully it manages to articulate its messages and politics is certainly up for debate, but that it attempts at all to critique what it does is more than can be said about any of the other American attempts at adding something to this franchise. Previous attempts worked to remove the nuclear themes of the text altogether, and future attempts have swung right around to positive depictions of nuclear weaponry and military-approved propaganda. So I say, without a hint of irony, this is the most interesting American Godzilla movie politically. While many Godzilla fans severely dislike this film for what they perceive as its failures to the franchise and the iconic creature at its centre, this film stands as a fascinating part of the legacy of Godzilla, especially among the often overlooked American projects. With its reimagined creature and altered focuses, it isn't a Godzilla movie in some ways, but deeply Godzilla in others. I don't honestly expect to have changed your mind here. I think most people will still look at this movie as a joke and an embarrassment, not worth the time that I have devoted to it. But I at least hope that I've given you something to think about, because that's always worth it. So while I was watching the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, I found these amazing old Cartoon Network ad bumpers. They truly have to be seen to be believed.
We will return to the only guy with bigger feet than Shaquille O'Neal, Godzilla, slamming and jamming on Cartoon Network. Remember, Godzilla is a good guy. Don't be frightened by his monstrous appearance. He loves you. He told me so.
Godzilla, the horrible lizard from the sea, will return on the Cartoon Network. Look out, he's gonna eat you!
Godzilla, king of all thunder lizards, shall return. He's going to stuff his face with Smurfs again. You're gonna get fat, Godzilla. Remain still, Cartoon Network viewers. Do not provoke Godzilla. For a guy who spends so much time in the water, Godzilla sure is stinky smelling. Whoa, be glad Cartoon Network isn't in Smellorama. He's a lean, mean, monster battling machine, Godzilla. Oh, no. There goes Cartoon Network. Go, go, Godzilla. Yeah, yeah. Godzuki, where are you, fella? Cartoon Network's taking a break. We gotta find him. Search around your house. Maybe he's out back or something.
I would just like to thank my patrons for indulging me in making far too long videos about a Godzilla movie no one likes. This video was a reward for meeting a Patreon goal, so it literally wouldn't exist without them. With an extra special thanks to a Socialist Hobgoblin, Chris Harper, Dan Brown, Juice4711, William Gray, Bags, Finn Flaherty, and Laura M. If you'd like to join these wonderful people and support me, then head to patreon.com/DavidJBradley or click the link at the end. If not, then you can still help out a great deal by liking, commenting, subscribing, or clicking one of the videos that will appear now.
Finally, Godzilla in the snow. Finally.